Welcome to the Jade Histories, Episode 7, Obsidian Edition, and Time of the Void. The greatest story in gaming was to come to an end at Gen Con 1997, at the Day of Thunder. But too many fans wanted this amazing world and amazing story to continue. But at this point, we had no idea if it would or not. In a distant kingdom, in an age long forgotten, 7 thunders step into the heart of darkness. It is Rokugan's darkest hour. For 2 years, the War of the Clans has ravaged the Emerald Empire. Her mighty fortresses and majestic temples lie in ruin, and her green fields are stained with the blood of fallen heroes. Descendants of the Emperor's greatest heroes, the 7 Thunders, gather their armies outside the fortress of ultimate evil, the Imperial Palace. Time of the Void is the final chapter in the War of the Clans. It includes all 7 Thunder personalities, the last Black Scroll, and 12 conclusion cards that tell the tale of the Thunder's last stand. The fate of Rokugan is in your hands. Obsidian Edition was the last set released before Gen Con. It was released in August of that year, and it was I guess minorly noteworthy. The only new cards it really added was the battle standards for each faction, which is why I haven't included them here. What happened at the Day of Thunder is probably recorded in history as the greatest story in gaming. The players that traveled to Milwaukee, which is where it was at the time, for this event, gathered with the ability to either have 1,000 years of peace or 1,000 years of darkness, depending on if you were allied with the Yogo Jinzo's army, or otherwise known as the Shadowlands Horde. John Wick was the lead for the story team, and he gave a speech before the beginning of the event, and at the end of that speech he led the very first chant of Oots Bonsai in L5R history. Now, obviously, we understand today that there is some notorious history with that chant, based in what's happened throughout history in Japan, which is why Fantasy Flight Games got rid of it. But at the time, it was designed to get the players excited as they marched into battle, which for what could be the last time in L5R. As we go through, I'll talk about the story and what happened. There were many pieces to this puzzle that were taken down by Dr. Zen Focus, who had the website known as Steel and Iron. He was a judge and a rule team member during the early days of L5R, all the way up until probably the last couple of years of the game. He retired from that role, and truly, he was the first historian of L5R, if you will. He took down the notes of each World Championship to that point. And as part of my my growth, I realized that the notes from this website that was disappearing, unfortunately, that the Wayback Machine did not completely capture, needed to be continued in some shape, form, or fashion, so that future generations could see and read what had happened in those days, which is why I duplicated them and noted that most of these were taken by Zen Focus. I think there was a couple that I was actually there for, that I got to actually take some of those information live, as well as tournament reports from players that played in the events in the last couple of years. There was a number of all the factions were represented in some shape, form, or fashion, and John Wick had an envelope with each faction on the envelope itself. And when those clans were eliminated, the envelope and the story within it were destroyed. So we'll never know what the alternate endings would be for each of those factions. The only person that had those written down was John Wick, and to my knowledge, he has never given any indication of what the alternate story would have been had X Clan won. The final four players were 2 lion, 1 crane, and a phoenix. The phoenix player, after the last Shadowlands player was eliminated in the Yogu Jinzo's army was eliminated in the event, he revealed underneath his Phoenix t-shirt that he was wearing, he revealed that he had a Shadowlands shirt underneath. He was playing a corrupt Phoenix deck, which obviously makes sense in that statement. So it's Chris Bergstrom, Lion Clan, versus Steve Horvath, Lion Clan. Rob Kramer, Crane Clan, versus Derek Hushyan, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, was the Phoenix player. Steve Horvath name comes up more than once in L5R history. This was his biggest splash as a player. Later on, he was he'd been a game store owner. He worked for Wizards of the Coast at one point in time when L5R was under Wizards of the Coast umbrella, and he was brand manager for a short period of time. And to my knowledge, in 2015, he was the person that came to John Zenzer and said, we want to purchase the IP of Legend of the Five Rings. When that deal was brokered, that's how Fantasy Flight Games got its hands on Legend of the Five Rings. Steve, I know you may or may not be listening, we as players appreciated what you attempted to do, both for your company, Fantasy Flight Games, that you're a part of, as well as the L5R community. You felt like at the time that you could do the game justice as a former player and as a former brand manager for the game. While we appreciate what has happened, there are many players, particularly the group that was originally targeted for the reboot of the game, that most of us left. And I think that was ultimately the downfall of the reboot. I have asked many times, are you interested in leasing the property or selling the IP? Myself or David Lapp, who is over Pine Box Entertainment, who has showed that he can continue a brand successfully with Doomtown Reloaded and now 7th Sea, would be very capable at continuing a proper legacy for the story and the playability of the game. If you ever decide that it might be the right time either to sell the IP or to lease it to another company, know that both of us can be reached and that both of us care deeply for this game and the people that we've met. Steve is actually a dragon player by trade, but I think he understood at this point in time that Lion were the best military deck of the time. So I will cut this this synopsis short before we go over the cards that were printed in Time of the Void and how they impacted the story. Steve lost in the semifinals to Chris, and Rob Kramer, the Crane player, defeated the Corrupt Phoenix player. So at that point, both Chris and Rob I guess they really didn't care who won. They just wanted Fooling defeated. And they had to play it out for story purposes, but Crane ended up getting run over, and Chris Bergstrom was the first world champ, not the first world champion. He was the winner of the Day of Thunder. InQuest magazine printed a foiled copy of the Strongholds, the ancestral home of the Lion, in one of their printed magazines. It was technically the first foil card in L5R history. Alright, so let's get to the cards. Obviously, cards in Time of the Void were printed and released after Obsidian Edition, but many of these had long-term effects, both in the story as well as the power level of the game. So a Soul of Thunder was an extremely powerful event that basically said, you can challenge me all day, but if you don't duel and beat me before the next turn, I'm gaining 7 honor. 7 honor was a massive amount of honor in those days. And this is an event that saw play After the set was released, it saw play through the entirety of the extended Jade and open formats for as long as it was legal. They realized 7 Honor was a lot, and so they eventually toned it down in a reprint later, but it was still a very strong card. A Test of Courage was probably one of the best anti-movement cards that they printed, and it was not only was it powerful, it was still niche enough that it could be reprinted in many base sets to come, and it was for the longest time the standard for you want to send me home in this battle? No, I'm not going anywhere. Of course, there was a restriction that you couldn't target the personality for the remainder of the battle, but for the most part, there's a reason you wanted them to stay there. Agasha Ginai. So the dragon, and I always thought this was an interesting character because being able to filter more fate cards was something that was a powerful effect that we hadn't seen a lot of. Most of the card draw that we had seen, you go through your Dynasty deck fast, but going through your Fate deck fast is much more difficult. And I always thought this character was very strong, just to help you filter more cards. I kind of wish that there was a better Enlightenment deck at the time with him, but there never really was. The Agasha Tunnels. So this limited ability to basically burn your Fate deck to find a specific spell is really powerful in Eternal formats. It took a lot for regions to be playable in L5R, and this had an effect that was really good, even if it was dangerous. Obviously, you didn't lose if your Fate deck or your Dynasty deck was empty. You just didn't get to draw anymore. But if you were playing some sort of combo, this card could help you find the spell that you were needing. Alright. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, if you will. Matthew D. Wilson was the art director of L5R from the beginning through Time of the Void. Matt had and John Wick had some conflicts that continued to rise up. Now, I don't have a full story on what happened, but this was Matt Wilson's last piece of artwork for L5R for a very long time. And the kanji that's etched in the walls, if you will, says something to the effect of, "F you, John Wick, I quit." So that little hidden tidbit has been around for a long time. Kachiko is the Scorpion Clan Thunder. She unfortunately has had to play the wife or the concubine of the last Hantai emperor, who is being embodied by Fu Ling. Unfortunately, Kachiko's been weakening the Hantai's physical body with her poisons, trying to get back at him for killing her husband, Shoju, or not him killing her, but denouncing her clan and basically forcing her into servitude. Kachiko's ability was rather strong as a control mechanism, and this piece of information here, may attach the broken sword of the Scorpion without gold cost, is quite relevant based on a story point that we're going to hear when I get through the all of the cards. Ben Like a Reed was one of the an early I guess meta cards for dueling. In a duel versus duel or dueling deck versus dueling deck, you had to have cards like this to one up your opponent, and this had a pretty cool ability. Berserkers, this was a cheap follower that basically doubled its force for a low cost. It could blow itself up, but it's possible that it may not. And it's very easy to use this ability, especially if your opponent's army has zero force. So it made it a little easier to take provinces. And this was a follower that, a 2 for 4 or 4 for 4 with maybe a drawback, was good enough to reprint in other sets without it being too overpowered. Burning Your Essence. So yes, it has a 0 focus value. But if you focus it in a duel, or you use the focus value with a personality's ability, typically this was the tactician ability, they get to, it's a 6, but they lose 2 chi after the resolution of whatever the effect is. This was a hard card to get a hold of in those days, because Time of the Void was a very powerful set overall, and sometimes finding these cards were difficult. I know during the open events, that was the first 2 story arcs together, some of these were ridiculous to find. We have the remaining corrupt holdings. This is the Geisha House, the gold mines, and the stables. These all bow for 1, and they lose 1 honor, or 2 and lose 1 honor if they're of that specific clan. I'll just go on record as saying Dark Lord's Favor, in my opinion, was the most powerful card out of Time of the Void. For the clans that wanted to play this card, it was absolutely an amazing card. You only play 1 a turn. You have to have the lowest honor. You lose 7 honor when you play it, and you get one of these 4 effects, which is basically it was ridiculous. So typically the clans that played it in those days were Scorpion. since they're playing a Dishonor deck, and for them to play Breach of Etiquette properly, they needed to be lower honor than you. So they could easily play this and dishonor your personality, lose 7 honor. If you pass, then they could breach you, dropping you below them again. And then they could do something nasty to your dishonored personality. The Yogujinzo's Army or Shadowlands players, they played this as well, since they didn't lose honor. And this actually got a reprint once, and was actually scheduled for reprint in Onyx. And I hate that we never got to see that set. Destiny has no secrets. So this was basically an innocuous pump effect. +2 force, +2 chi for a card wasn't bad because it pumped both. Revealing your hand to each other player was kind of a detriment. But there was a few decks in the game's history that they didn't really care to show you their hand. And then there was some of those decks that just emptied their hand, and this was the next to last card in it. So it didn't matter. I've got no other cards to show, so it doesn't matter. You'll see this in a number of deck lists early, and they reprinted it several times in the future as well. It didn't get as much play after the first 2 story arcs as it did during the early years, but it was definitely interesting. Doji Chome. So this character helped, was an ambassador to the 3-man alliance. So this was the clans, the minor clans that wanted to form an alliance between themselves, which involved the Wasp, the Fox Clan, and the Sparrow. At the time, they were all aligned in Yoritomo's alliance. There were no Mantis, or there were very few Mantis personalities at the time, so ended up reducing gold cost of the Mantis followers. There were quite a number of those. It showed the Mantis helping out the Crane on those cards. Basically, Crane Gold paid for the alliance to grow. The second Thunder is Doshi Katuri. This beautiful piece by Carl Frank is very iconic. Very strong ability. Totori and Kachiko have a moment right before the end of the story that sort of ties their love affair. And closes the book on their love affair and their history in a very touching moment. Doji Kawanan. So Kawanan is the younger brother of Hotori. And he comes back a fighter and is ready to die on this day, on the Day of Thunder, to make sure that the Dark One ends. And Kawanan will end up being an important character as we move into the future of the game. Doji Chome is also a sibling of Kuwanen and Totori. She's really the second major card in the game that saw a lot of play that dealt with gaining or losing honor and how to increase or decrease that. And Ray Soesby, who I don't know if she was a part of the story team at the time or if she joined afterwards. I'm almost certain she was a part of the story team beforehand. This was her character, if you will. Enlistment. Follower decks were not very popular in the early days of the game based upon the rule set that was involved. This card, for story effect, basically showed that they were going around recruiting anybody that they could to fight against the darkness. They needed it during the Day of Thunder. But effect-wise, this became a de facto way for follower decks to refill their hand, and it became important more in future story arcs than it did for this one. It was actually a key card in the next story arc as part of Totori's army. Flight of Doves. This was a fairly good way to increase honor-producing holdings. There were some in the early days of the game that produced two honor, and bumping this to 3 is a decent amount. This card was better again later on when individual actions had lower honor gains on them, and so using holdings to produce honor was a better choice. During these days, when cards are gain 5 honor, gain 7 honor, gain 4 honor, it was kind of hard to use this card, but this was the first printing of it. More as a story as a point out here. For the Empire, makes sense that it was in this set. Samurai versus a Shadowlands character, based upon who won. That card either got an honor gain and personal honor increased by 1, or the Shadowlands personality got bigger because it beat this massive samurai. Very flavorful for the set. Hida Oushi. We can tell she is still the Crab Clan bully. Brian Snoddy continues his artwork, particularly of this character. Her abilities: bow her to bow somebody with lower force. That ability wasn't great unless somebody was stacked full of followers, and then when you bowed the personality, none of their followers counted for force, so you actually reduced the strength pretty heavily. The second ability, though, really messed up dueling decks. We're duel of force, not chi, buddy. So that was certainly not great to deal with. Now, her brother is Hideyakumo, the Crab Clan Thunder. He is he's fully healed. The Jade hand has replaced the Oni's claw that was on his hand. He still has can still attach the ancestral sword of the Hantai. That was something he won in a contest. Yakumo has multiple things to deal with on the Day of Thunder. Besides dealing with Fu Ling, he also has to deal with the Oni that has his name. And that won't be an easy task because even though he has the Jade hand, he might not be enough. It might not be enough to hold off the Oni's power. I believed in you. This was a powerful tool for Dishonor decks, particularly if your opponent got cards into play and then you drop their honor. You could play this if they actually had an honor requirement, and they end up committing seppuku. So there's no honor loss there, unless they're already dishonored. But it was more personality control to keep your opponent from taking your provinces while you drag their honor through the dirt. Akoma Tsunari. So Tsunari was a student of Totori. Matsusuko trusted her as one of her generals. 14 gold's a lot for a Lion Clan personality, even with Tactician. Her ability was quite powerful. Basically, terrains and regions are ignored while she's in an army. And then you can deal with particular characters as necessary. In Time of War, this was an event that was designed to try to slow down honor runners, and there were several events that were printed in the first couple of years of the game that were designed to do this. In Time of War was one that was reprinted. I won't say it's the most, but at least tied for the most. Most of the time, players got proficient at learning how to play around this, trying to gain 5 honor on their own turn and 5 honor on their opponent's turn, which wasn't terribly difficult, but it became a staple event as honor meta moving forward in L5R's history. Asawa Tadaka. This is his Thunder version. He's lost the Shadowlands trait, which is interesting. Technically, you can purify the taint, as we find out later, or at least suppress it. But Tadaka has several things that he has to deal with. He first has to deal with Sawasuke, as the other elemental masters are fighting to the death and trying to burn down Kyuunisawa. And then, after that fight, he has to go and join the other Thunders at the Imperial Palace to fight Fu Ling. This is Ono's Experience 2 character. This is the version that this is a twice per game effect. To me, it was never very good, but this version actually has force and some chi, where the other versions are don't have much of anything. Aochi Karasu. So we saw his version, his non-unique version, which switched or moved followers around. This unique version actually switched full locations of units, and we learn more about the Death Seeker and their history as we move into the Jade Ark. This is formerly Akoto Kage. This is where he's fully embraced the lifestyle of the Kolat. Master Tiger is hiding. Not, I won't say he doesn't really care what's going on, but he feels the right outcome is going to happen. Anson Maddox did a lot of his artwork. Matter of fact, he might have done every piece of his artwork through the end of the Jade Ark. Kitsu Okura. This character became more interesting in the next story arc based on some of the things that happened story-wise. His ability is not very powerful for the time being, even though can't be targeted by the Imperial Favor. It's a pretty strong ability. Matsu Hiroru, the White Ninja. So, I was a big fan of G.I. Joe back in the day, and I was always liked the two ninjas that they had. And as soon as I saw this artwork, I said, yeah, they've modeled this after it. For me, it was just, this guy's a cool character. No political actions for you. Alright, Matsuturi. We spoke of Matsuturi in the pre-Imperial set. This is the first time he actually sees print. When they started moving the names around and everything, this is the first time that we see him. These stats are quite high for an 8 gold personality, but Lion was always difficult at this point because they were probably using Matsu Agataki, who was a 4/4 for 8 gold and had cavalry and couldn't be targeted by ranged attacks. Now we come to the Dragon Clan Thunder, Miyamoto Hitomi. So Hitomi is fighting the corruption of the Obsidian Hand. She ends up saving the life of Yakumo against the Oni that shares his name. and this claw is going to become quite important here in just a minute. This this document that she is holding is the last Black Scroll. And this ability that she has about bowing to destroy any one dragon in play, gains abilities, etc., is on point flavor-wise for what happens in the story. Oni no Pickle, or Peko. This was a very interesting card for honor-based decks, even if it did have this drawback: if it's destroyed, you lose 10 honor. I will say that I have played honor rocket decks that have played this card, particularly with an event, either a card from hand or an event in play that made this card aligned to your clan. So if that was the case, you'd gain 3 honor for coming into play for proclaiming, 3 honor from its game text. That's 6 honor, and then gains another one on the next turn for 7. Losing 10 honor sucks, don't get me wrong, but there were some formats you could actually get away with, and I always liked, running that in a deck that was like, if you can't draw your removal before I hit before I cross 40 and last another turn, oh well. Oni no Uglu, 4/2 for 4 gold was actually reasonable for that day and age. There were some Oni that were way too expensive and undercosted. Then you had, or overcosted, and then you had some like Akuma and Kyoso and Subaru, who were all overpowered and undercosted. This was probably the first one that they got right as far as force to gold cost and ability. And this one ended up eventually getting a reprint because it actually fit very well. So this is the Ataka Komoko Thunder. So her ability here lets her search for personalities and put them in your provinces. So basically, the design there was she was going around rallying the other Thunders and getting them to the palace. And this was designed more of that effect of for the theme itself rather than what she would do normally. This second ability, it was pretty crazy. If you're leaving, I'm basically gonna cut you down. So, plans within plans. Little proverb here. Being able to play a limited action as an open action was quite powerful, because most of the limited actions were basically sorcery speed or on your turn, and open actions could be done in either. Being able to do this on an opponent's turn when the card or ability was designed to only be used on your turn was super overpowered, and this card's ended up becoming a problem based on when it was reprinted. There's some honor gains that you could only do on your turn that now you could do on your turn and your opponent's turn, and really messed up the math. Rebuilding the Caillou walls. This really is what happened after the end of the story. This was an interesting effect, but not completely useful based upon the couple of strongholds they printed in the set. Regions of Rokugan. Basically, you both got to tutor for a region. Which again, in the limited number of regions that you had, this could be good to get a specific one that you needed for a matchup. Shiba Sukune. Sukune on this day would end up becoming the Phoenix Clan champion. Shiba Uchimitsu would die in the ensuing battle at Isawa Palace, and the sword of the Phoenix would choose Sukune as the next champion. Shinjo Yasamura. This was actually a decent personality. It had Tactician, it had Cavalry. You drew a fate card when it came into play. 3 force plus a Tacticianing a 3 or a 4, and Cavalry would make it so you could take a province with him. His importance to the story actually comes in the next arc. The 12th Black Scroll. So this is the Black Scroll that Hitomi is holding. It's free, attached to a Dragon personality. Any player can use this ability, which was the drawback. But the item is destroyed. Discard 3 cards from hand to end the battle. Each player with units in the battle must destroy 5 cards he or she has at the battle. Surviving units return the player's home without bowing. And with its opening, Fu Ling's power was complete. But in the shadows, Shinsei's hooded descendant filled the room with his laughter. The darkest magics. So this talks about an extra win condition. If you've already used or test 7 black scrolls, when this hits, you win the game at the beginning of the next turn. If you ever use all 12 black scrolls, you win the game immediately. And I actually remember seeing theme decks back in those days that would do this. They would just be turboing those out. The Path of Wisdom. Card doesn't do much. Doesn't have any ability, except for if it's in your discard pile, it comes back to your hand. So it fits sort of the serene lifestyle of a monk. So what good can this card be? Well, throughout L5's history, there's been several cards that had you discard cards and use this focus value for an effect. And being able to basically discard a card for free and then get it back at the end of the turn to use again for the next turn or for your opponent's turn was actually quite useful, even if it didn't have any other relevant game text. Today We Die. So, as many samurai stories begin, they're always ready to die. The reason they're ready to die is because if they go into battle wanting to live, they will surely die. If they go into battle willing to die, they will surely live. At least that's what the legend says. This is a difficult card. To pull off, because it basically forces them to attack every turn, can't lobby for the favor. They can permanently get bigger every turn, and they can only be played, only one could be played on each personality. But this card had its moments in later story arcs. Togashi Yokuni. So Yokune is not a thunder, but his role in this goes back 1,000 years. Togashi Yokune is actually the god Togashi, one of the brothers of Fu Ling. He has been hiding within the descendants of himself for 1,000 years. And he reveals himself at the Day of Thunder to Fu Ling, and they battle. Yokune ends up being mortally wounded, and he tells Hitomi that she needs to kill him. Now she takes her obsidian hand and grasps his chest and crushes his rib cage, grabbing his heart and pulling it out. Within his rib cage and his heart, he has hidden the 12th Black Scroll. He knew that this day would come, and that scroll would be needed for the final battle. And so he has meditated and helped shape Totori and Hitomi, as well as some of the other thunders, to make sure that they reach their destiny. His ability shows that the sort of the effect that he had. And this is another one of those badass Matt Wilson artworks. Togashi Yoshi. This was sort of a meta card for the for dueling. I used him quite a bit. Basically, it gave you an extra focus, which really messed up people's math. The Legend of Toku. So that 0-1 character that we met back in Imperial, that didn't even have a clan, ended up becoming an experienced personality. He's not very strong, 1 force, 2 chi. He has an ability where he can straighten himself and then give him an exhaustion token. We'll oddly enough see this ability later, but basically he's saying that I'm either going to die, but I'm not going to give up. And so him going from a meme character to an experienced character was something the community grasped onto and loved, and he would even gain more fame as we move forward. Totori, the prodigal son, if you will, on this day of thunder, he convinces the lion to stop fighting against him and join him. And his words are for Suko and the Empire. And they all come charging under his banner, Totori's army and the Lion Clan, as they push forward into the Imperial Palace. Wedge. So this card ended up being a very powerful and a very hard card to find during the early days of the game, doubling the force of an entire unit in battle, even if you couldn't target it for the rest of the battle, and even if you would lose all cards in the unit after the battle, was incredibly powerful. At least at the time it was. What's even more amazing was the fact that this card ended up being reprinted in a number of future story arcs. It wasn't used as much. There were some it got used in, but not always. But it certainly was better when you had, a unit that was 10, 15, 20 force, and you doubled it to 40. But I digress. Yoden, this is his experienced version. I've used both the base and the unique, or the experienced version in my Enlightenment decks. He was a very good character for those decks. He looks more like a Sohi here. Now we get to my favorite character in the entirety of Legend of the Five Rings. The story of Yoritomo was so badass that he became the de facto character that I loved, and why I ended up becoming a Mantis player. The quote on the bottom of the card really says it all. I never knew fear before I saw the Son of Storms. What Yoritomo did, and I don't think, that's the last card. What Yoritomo did in the story was he rode up to Totori, Hoturi, Yakumo, and several of the other Thunders with his armies, and Totori asked if his armies were ready to die to help the Empire. And he said, I'm willing to die, whether it's at their feet or yours is your choice. Hoturi and Toshimoko took offense to that, and Totori let him speak, and he said, I want to be a great clan. The Alliance has proven their worth, and I'm willing to die for that right. He basically said, I will send my messengers back to my armies, and I will let you take my head for my insolence. But I am willing to die to become a great clan. Yakumo got a hell of a laugh saying, I like this guy. This guy's got balls, basically. And Totori was like, I don't have a problem with this, but you better make sure that you don't fail. And he said, my men never fail. Now that type of brashness, that type of I will not fail attitude, that is something that I absolutely loved in the character. And I fell in love with Yoritomo. I thought Kikita Toshimoko and Daidoji Uji were my favorite characters before this. But nothing and no character before or after ever stuck in my mind as the pure badass that Yoritomo was. And that's the story of how I became a Mantis player. So what happened at the Day of Thunder? Well, all the strongholds were printed with a story back. It's the first time they ever did this. And the story backs told the story of what happened that day. So Yogo Jinzo was killed by Otako Komoko. Trampled his head. Jinzo's body was definitely taken to Trader's Grove, which is a place where the Scorpion put traders, and basically pinned them to enchanted trees where their soul stays for the eternity and is tortured. All the masters of the elements, except Kaede, died in the fight for Sawa Palace, except for Tadaka. Tadaka was hurt. Sukune helped get him to the palace for the final battle. When the final battle happened, when the final Black Scroll was opened, and Fu Ling became all powerful, what ended up happening is Shinsei's descendant, the Hooded Ronin, laughed and smiled at Fu Ling. Fu Ling knew that his power was finally released in full, but the Hooded Rodent said, but there's one thing you didn't realize. When the final Black Scroll was opened and all your power was released, you were fully binded to the last Hantai. And since you are now bound to the last Hantai, you are now mortal. Which meant if he dies, then Fu Ling is no more. And so the battle rages. Tadaka ends up dying in a he ended up getting one of his jade arrows shot back or redirected by Fu Ling back to him. He ends up dying at the battle. Yakumo and Hitomi end up surviving, but Hitomi's mind is more shattered by the corruptness of the Obsidian Hand. Kachiko ends up, it looks like she's going to get choked by the Emperor, but she ends up pulling her hairpins down, and she uses the hairpins to stab Fu Ling in the eyes. That's supposedly the broken sword of the Scorpion, but we find out that that's actually not the case. Supposedly that was the sword that was broken by Hantai, who became Fu Ling. But it's actually a blood sword. It's the blood sword Ambition, one of four blood swords forged centuries before by Yanjinin and Ayuchiban that caused chaos. But basically part of the history of that was that they said it would taste the blood of an emperor. And it did. While Fu Ling was blinded, Totori and Hotori attacked in tandem. Fu Ling ended up mortally wounding Hotori, and Totori ended up beheading Fu Ling, ending the reign of Hantai the 39th, and ending Fu Ling as a threat to Rokugan in mortal form. Kachiko and Hotori have their final moments as Hotori ends up dying from the mortal wound. Hotori apologizes to Kachiko. Kachiko apologizes to him for all the, for the the Egapan coup situation, the fact that she tried to destroy his clan, destroy his family, and of course he told Kachiko to always remember him. At the end of the Day of Thunder, the winner of the event became the next emperor of Rokugan, Totori the First. Now, this was supposed to be the end of the story and the end of the game. It was AEG's design to basically create a game and a story. They would play to the end of that particular story. Players would affect that story. Then the game would end, and they would do it for a new game. They ended up deciding, after all the players basically were like, we don't want this game to end. We want this to continue. They decided that they would continue that story, but they would go forward with the plans for a new game and a new story, just wouldn't end L5R. So what ended up happening would be they would end up telling the tales of a prequel, the Scorpion Clan coup, and that is where we would pick up on our next episode. Thank you for being on this journey with me as we go through the history of L5R, the cards, and the story. Until next time, there is no escape from the tiger.